It's an eventful day for President Biden in Paris. French President Emmanuel Macron honored Biden and the First Lady with a state visit meant to underscore the strong French and American partnership on global security issues. The two presidents attended a wreath-laying ceremony at the Arc de Triomphe in Paris and a state dinner at the Élysée Presidential Palace. And earlier this week, Biden and Macron attended ceremonies in Normandy marking the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion that turned the tide against Nazi Germany in the Second World War. In remarks, President Biden thanked the veterans who were there, some of them 100 years old, thanked them for their bravery and heroism. And he highlighted the importance of American democracy during another speech the next day at the Pointe du Hoc Memorial.
We talk about democracy, American democracy. We often talk about the ideals of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. What we don't talk about is how hard it is. American democracy asks the hardest of things, to believe that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. So democracy begins with each of us. It begins when one person decides there's something more important than themselves.
Joining me now, former Congressman David Jolly, an MSNBC political analyst, and Alencia Johnson, political strategist and senior advisor for Biden's 2020 presidential campaign. Thank you both very much for coming to this, the Saturday show. Thanks for coming back, David. Welcome, Alencia. But, David, I'm going to start with you. Talk about the importance of President Biden's tribute to American soldiers for D-Day.
Jonathan, that was really a remarkable moment for an American president at Pointe du Hoc, recognizing the valor and courage of Americans and service members from around the globe that fought for freedom, doing so in a spot that is immediately recognizable. And the reason it was so powerful was not just Joe Biden's words. I mean, it fits perfectly his ethos and his political message about the soul of America and the importance of freedom in the West. But I couldn't help but contrast that with pictures of Donald Trump at Helsinki, where he sided with Russia, where he questioned our own democracy. And then you bring in the events of January 6th, the contrast between what Joe Biden did right there as an American president, recognizing freedom on the world stage, but speaking to every American voter about the importance of their freedom right here at home that is under threat. The contrast between that and Donald Trump just made for that moment to be that much more remarkable.
And you know, Lindsay, I would love to get your thoughts on the president's speech and whether it resonates with the American people, the voters back at home. But I have to say, watching those veterans, particularly the African-American veterans who were there, just how poignant that moment was for them. But your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, he showed strength. He showed that what America should look like as a global leader, right? Something that symbolizes democracy. I do think it resonates with a segment of American voters, veterans, those hopefully in the armed forces, those who actually understand the history, right? You know, the Biden campaign is tempering with younger voters who, quite frankly, have grown up with Barack Obama, Donald Trump. They don't connect as much with some of this as older voters do. However, showing his force there, showing his strength there, juxtaposed with how Donald Trump looks with world leaders and which world leaders Donald Trump cozies with, I think that is going to play well for President Biden here as we get closer to Election Day.
David, NBC News reports that Donald Trump has narrowed the list to between 3 and 4 picks. You see them right there. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum and Senators Marco Rubio of Florida, Tim Scott of South Carolina, and J.D. Vance of Ohio. All of them were critical of Trump at one point or another, David. But what is Trump looking for in a vice president this time around?
Someone to say yes and someone to notionally not detract from his ticket. Or in the case of Burgum, somebody that could write a really big check to support Donald Trump's campaign. And look, I think what Burgum has going for him is we could go all the way to November before the nation actually knows who this guy is. I mean, clearly, maybe he's a very nice guy. We saw him try to be somewhat reasonable during the primary. We know he has high marks as governor. But Donald Trump is looking for somebody to fall in line. Marco Rubio has long been my dark horse, who's now moved up. I guess he's in the final 4, simply because he played the politics of Donald Trump right. He didn't relitigate his flip-flop for the last 8 years. He just flopped, and he owned it, and he didn't try to do it in front of the press. He just owned it. And he reminds Nikki Haley voters that there are people like Nikki Haley still supporting Donald Trump. But look, the vice president is not going to change. The vice presidential nominee is not going to change Donald Trump's behavior, nor the party's platform. What the country should hope for is somebody capable of governing should Donald Trump end up not being able to serve.
And so, Alencia, of those four people, who do you think he's gonna pick?
I mean, they're all kind of
Yeah, I know.
crapshoot. However, I think he might pick someone like Tim Scott, given that it gives diversity on the ticket.
Alencia, seriously,
I mean,
you
look,
really think he cares
in air
about
quotes.
diversity?
They have been trying to run black candidates in certain areas. The Republicans are trying to get away from being called the party full of white supremacists and racists. So Tim Scott falls in line, and he happens to be a black man. Maybe.
I heard you get
Hey, Jonathan,
Yeah, go ahead.
I heard there's an awesome new book written by Jonathan Capehart that's about to drop. Maybe I'll bet Alencia that it's not Tim Scott, and the wager will be the new Capehart book.
Well, that book's not coming out until May of next year. Knock on wood.
That's fine.
So,
I'm excited about it.
oh, David, thank you very much. That's very nice of you. But in the little seconds that we have left, I'm going to get us back on topic and say this. The one thing we all know about Donald Trump is that he is based on appearances. He gave somebody the Department of Defense secretary job because he looked the part. And so of those four characters we saw before, Governor Burgum looks the part. To Donald Trump's mind, that is. The little time I've spent in his head. Former Congressman David Jolly, Alencia Johnson, thank you both very much for coming to the Saturday Show.